Thank you, Gerd, for this call to action in the end. It's inspiring. I'm going to ask you a little later on whether you consider yourself political or not. We've had an anonymous comment, which I was thinking that you're describing a scenario which you can see in the fiction Black Mirror. There's an episode called Nosedive, which I recommend to those who haven't seen it, which imagines what would happen if surveillance went too far. And it's often the case, isn't it, that science fiction can predict scenarios which...
And Nosedive is the unpolitical version where everyone rates everyone else. It's like it's already happening. The Uber driver rates you, you rate the Uber driver. The restaurant rates you, you rate the restaurant. That's already happening. It's just that there is more technology in Nosedive.
It's interesting, isn't it? So we've had a number of questions asking about bias of this kind and of bad behavior, comparing the automated version of bias with the human one. There is an interesting example, isn't there, was the difference between Ubers and minicabs. There's actually an interesting gender component. A lot of young women feel more comfortable getting in a cab that's been assigned by an algorithm with this rating than they used to in the old days when there was a creepy controller, old man in a booth who would assign the old man driver. And we've had several people commenting that bias is bias. Russell says the problem is the bias, whether it's human or AI. Do you think that there's something intrinsically worse about bias in computers or in algorithms than in humans?
Yeah. The term bias is a very interesting one because on the one side, we wouldn't be as intelligent as we are if we wouldn't have biases. So biases are built in. We know that the world is three-dimensional. That's a bias. It may not be. We make intelligent inferences that we can see things. That's exactly the problem of deep neural networks, that they don't have the right biases, or we don't know how to build them in. So in that sense, there would be no intelligence in humans if there would be nothing built in, assumptions. And they may be right or wrong, but we need to have some. That's the thing. On the example of the female who prefers an algorithm, I can easily see that because there are ratings and one can assume that they are correct. It hasn't helped always. And as you now know, at least in restaurants, I just met a restaurant owner asking about how many of his stars are genuine and how many are bought. He said, look, I couldn't survive with my restaurant if I wouldn't buy them because everyone else buys them. And it was a good restaurant. So there are different kinds of biases. And I think the lesson is really to keep your eyes open, and digital technology is a great thing, but we should not lean back. It needs more human agency, and we need to become smarter if the technology becomes smarter.
To that extent, we find the technology inspiring. Look, on this question of bias, Eric, for example, has been wondering about self-driving cars. He's used a particular brand, but there are several. He says a Tesla, he says, may crash into a parked emergency vehicle a lot of the time. But on average, they crash at a far lower rate than the average car. So finding examples where an AI-driven, literally or metaphorically, system makes mistakes and becoming upset about that may allow us to ignore all the times that humans make mistakes, not the kinds of mistakes, but simply the proportion, the number of mistakes. Humans are lousy drivers. Thousands of people get killed all the time. Yeah. And so isn't there a risk by fixating on a particular awfulness of a self-driving car killing someone, that we ignore the large numbers of humans that kill people with cars.
Yeah. So the commentator is right. Yeah, one has to compare them, but the Tesla cars or the Uber cars, who are called self-driving cars, are no self-driving cars. There's always a human behind that. They are just good. No, they're not even level 3 cars. They're just better cars than we have. They're better level 2 cars, and we are not talking about self-driving cars.
No, that's fair. But even if, let's ignore the question, we should come back to the question of what self-driving means, and we should also come back to the question of what intelligence means. But leaving the definitions aside, if there is a particular technology which overall causes less harm, right, shouldn't we embrace it, even if the harm that it causes feels terrible, because it's a machine that's done the harm rather than a human doing the harm? Shouldn't we look at, I mean, a statistician like you are listening, shouldn't we look at the overall numbers killed and not worry too much if now there are more of them being killed by machines than before?
Yes, and we have technologies that are wonderful, like safety belts. It's a technology, and that has saved many, many, many people. I'm all for it to have this as an obligation. If a technology works and saves the lives of people, and has safety belts also kill people, some unlucky ones who would have been survived if have been shot out of the car, but that's an average question. I see. What I'm reacting against is this kind of marketing hype of. It seems to me that Elon Musk is one of the last one who bets on self-driving cars. So I've worked with people who develop automized cars, and the common opinion is we will need to restructure our cities in order to have level 4 cars, and that will happen. And the point is, this is a much deeper change than the story about self-driving cars. There would nothing be different, except that you can read and do your email driving. In a level 4 car, you can do the same thing, but the environment will be changed, and people may no longer be allowed to drive at all.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, though? I mean, the environment question, Eric points out as a question earlier, that the roads are adapted for automobiles. There's that beautiful cartoon you may have seen, which is an average urban street as it really is for children. And it shows two little paths with a massive chasm in between, with the pedestrians walking on this little strip and the thing. And in fact, in the 1970s, roads were engineered to be safe by eliminating pedestrians, right? I mean, the safest roads for pedestrians are motorways because pedestrians aren't allowed. And in fact, it's vulnerable road users like cyclists, children that are most at risk from the self-driving cars. And we could make the road safe by banning them. So I guess there's a legislation question perhaps about cars at all, not so much about the technology. Would you see that as being a political question that needs to be decided in its own right?
Yes, because it's lots of investment. And so my personal preference would be not cars. It would be public transport. Mm-hmm. And so one possible future would be the following. There are little and slow level 4 cars on the streets where you can, it's like taxis. They have to be slow because otherwise they cause too many accidents.
Well, listen, the radical idea would be if the cars actually obeyed the speed limits. I mean, this they don't need to be slow; they just need to obey the limits. Keep going.
And which bring you to fast public transport. Mm-hmm. And where you go in a different city, there are the little slow cars again, and bring you wherever you want to. Mm-hmm. That's a likely future, but it will mean that the cities look different. These little cars, they can no longer tolerate humans who are human drivers around them, nor any pedestrians. So there will be walls around the streets and separate areas for cyclists and pedestrians.
Now, you've made this interesting point about adaptation of humans to fit algorithms. I mean, haven't technologies over time always changed human behavior?
Yeah.
It's not, AI is no different in that. I mean, it feels quite sinister, and I'm interested if you can expand on it. But the idea that the algorithms, I want to use a slightly loaded word here, the algorithms are grooming us to be more adaptable. But is that really unique, do you think, to AI technology?
No, it's not unique. It's just forgotten. We talk about assistance system, augmented intelligence. In reality, most of things are we adapt. It's not just an assistance. And you're right. So the people have been disciplined by new technology over centuries. So in Paris in the mid-19th century, there was huge traffic and intolerable traffic by horses, by carrots, by whatever who was on the way. And they've tried to introduce rules like keep right, or in England it would be keep left. Yeah. And people were very resistant to do this, just as they were resistant against rules that you shouldn't empty your chamber pot on the street. And it always took a long time that people got disciplined and their behavior will be changed. Now we are rule following. If driver's license, drive on the right side, on the left side, and so on.
Before Brexit, there was a joke that England was going to merge with Europe and that people would move from driving on the left to driving on the right, but the change would be brought in gradually.
That doesn't work. Yeah.
So I guess there is a question whether this is from Brana, but others have asked it as well. If we are adapting to this algorithmic and standardized world, is there still a role for innovation and creativity? And there's also been a question about whether if the algorithm, perhaps in China, spots aberrant questions, does it clamp down on somebody who thinks differently? What's your view of the role for human creativity within the algorithmic world? Is this being squashed out?
It's a good question. So if you replace, for instance, all painters by programs who paint, the creativity that you have is of a different kind. It's just recombination of something. It's association. And that would change our very idea of creativity. The same with music programs. And the type really jumping to something new, we do not know whether algorithms can really produce that. Certainly not that type of algorithms who get many examples and then try to infer the prototypical thing of that. And
that would be
at least at the moment, the hardest thing is in art to create stories, to create movies for AI. Pictures is easier. Have you ever seen horror movies by AI made? Good luck, I've seen them. It's boring to death.
So they don't know how to scale yet.
It makes no sense.
We've had some interesting questions. We've got Cassandra and also some ideas from Emily on this. Prejudice has always existed. Humans are racists and so on. There is a good argument that the algorithms are racist or biased because they learn from the humans. I wonder, over the last 5 years or so, there's been a lot of conversation about these biases, intrinsic bias, unconscious bias, and so on. And actually also there's been quite a lot of conversation in the West, at least, about Me Too, about Black Lives Matter, and a sense in which people in positions of power are being asked to question their own, what they say, check your privilege is the phrase. And I just wonder if you can see any connection. There may be a paradoxical positive effect to AI, that this discussion of bias in AI has actually held up a mirror to the biases which are in all of us. and led to some human improvement.
Yeah.
That we're trying to control, our biases are exposed as they become embodied in AIs, and this leads us to challenge them in ourselves. Do you see such a move?
I see one move that AI, by some group of people, AI is used to make fun about human intuition.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an entire group of behavioral economists who see their business in running experiment after experiment. Why? That showing that human intuition goes wrong. It's mostly about statistical intuitions and having a
right up your street, right?
Having a statistical training. I just can say many of those people who do this have no statistical training, and people are right often, and they are not. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, that's business. There are also some always more comments by well-respected colleagues of mine who say that it would be generally good if algorithms would replace the human mind, because the human mind has all these biases, and algorithms allegedly not, which is of course not true. There's another business of writers who invent more or less stories about algorithms that are better than humans. So Moneyball is an example. Mm-hmm. A famous book turned into a movie, and I have the details in my book. And it's just, the story is so good and so well taught with heroes and villains, but it's just not true. So as shown by baseball experts. And so again, the story that the algorithm would have been the cause of the success of Oakland A, the three pitchers who were the real success, none of them has been found by an algorithm, all by conventional intuition of scouts. So I'm just saying there's an entire business that fake news about algorithms and that it would be superior to human biases.
I'm curious about the terminology. I mean, the title of your book, and I'll remind people that it's available in all good bookshops, and we'll be putting a link in the chat. You talk about human intelligence and you talk about algorithms, and I just wonder. I mean, the AI term, is very prevalent. Do you think that the question of whether machines are intelligent? We've had several questions about this in the chat. Do you think it's a useful question, the intelligence of machines? Because you've spoken about algorithms, about biases, about behavior, and about risk. Is the question of intelligence as a property relevant in this context, do you think?
So the first version of AI was in the thinking of Herbert Simon, Alan Newell, and others. It meant to study the heuristics that experts use and put them into a program in order to make computers smart. It's very different from machine learning today. Machine learning today, at least most young machine learning people whom I know, they don't even think that they could learn anything from the human brain or the mind. It's very different. Herbert Simon had, whom I very much respect, and a part of my own research is to understand how experts make good decisions and model these. It's just that they usually have to do with uncertainty, where you then end up in simple algorithms and not in these overly complex ones. Algorithms that work with a few data points, that don't need big data. And so the one error that Simon had made is that he thought chess would be a good example. And he was studying chess. But chess is a stable world. And here, machine learning algorithms are really superior to us. While for many other problems, there is no evidence that, except marketing hype, if they have to do with uncertainty, that complex algorithms would be better than simple ones, or that what human intuition does anyhow.
A couple of quick questions about the flavors of machines. Brandon was wondering earlier, Nicholas was wondering earlier about the kind of training that the networks have had. Brandon was pointing out that there are many other things going on in AI beyond neural networks.
Yeah.
And Eric was also wondering, and I wonder if you can take these together, about the kind of flavor of machine, about embodiment, which I think is a very interesting question. You know, that one of the big differences between people and machines is that we've got bodies, that our brains really, could not really exist in the form that they do without our bodies. And I just wonder if you can talk about, these different flavors of machines. Is it the algorithm? Is it the embodiment? Where do you think the difficulty is lying?
Yeah. So human intelligence usually needs a body. For instance, by the way,
Eric is just saying, the chess algorithms of IBM, he's claiming, did not use AI as such. But yeah, so continue. Yeah.
Yeah. So think about sports. A cricket outfielder or a baseball outfielder, they use simple heuristics, like the gaze heuristic, to catch a ball, so that you fixate your eye on the ball and adjust your running speed so that the angle of gaze remains constant. Helps in lots of problems. It's extremely simple, but you need a body for that. A body who can run and a visual system who can keep your eye on a moving target against a noisy background. So it's perception and motor. And many of the heuristics that we have are embedded in that. And that's, and if we want to create something that resembles human intelligence, we need to also build a body around that. And so, and also the human intelligence comes equipped with a number of things that we have for free, like we are social animals. We ask others for advice. And some of our negative biases come from that we are part of a group, that we don't want to be outside of the group, that we see again in social media. And while AI or machine learning intelligence is alone, doesn't profit from others, has no culture to pass on to the next machine.
So look, we're coming towards the end of the conversation. I want to broaden out into two big jumps. So one is into the politics. And I mean, again, I pointed out at the end of your talk as we went to the questions that you sound quite, I don't know, somewhere angry, but you sound quite motivated, quite driven by the idea to change things. I know that was true for you also around risk, but several people in the chat, Mark, Nicholas, several others have pointed out that a lot of the things that you're talking about play differently in different kinds of systems between the authoritarian and the democratic, although, with criminals in the Senate, who knows how much longer this will remain. But I just wonder whether you can talk about the interaction or correlation between global political systems and the kinds of problems you're talking about. It was even there, wasn't it, in the amount people prepared to pay for privacy and so on. It's unusual for a piece of technology to be so politically correlated, don't you think?
Yeah. No. A democracy, I understand that democracy is based on citizens, at least a large proportion of citizens who take the time to know, to understand, and actively participate, and also sometimes willing to risk their lives. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, the invention of the printing press has helped enormous in order that people are able, not just the few ones, but everyone, principally, is able to read and write. So I think that's an example where technology enabled a form of government that we call democracy. In the same way, technology can serve the goals of autocratic systems and the surveillance potential of digital media is here of great interest for this type of system. So the German Stasi, the East German Stasi, would have loved this technology. And also, so the danger that I see is, what makes me really uneasy is that more and more people in democratic countries appear no longer to care so much about privacy, about their rights, and care more about convenience and entertainment. And so I have done several surveys, and in one of them I described the Chinese social credit systems without using the term China. But I asked here again in Germany a representative sample of people. So you know all about what about credit rating. What do you think? It would be a great idea if we just don't rate people just on their financial behaviors, on all social, political behavior, everything what they do, and put this into one score, and give the good ones with the high score goodies and punish the other ones. In the first time I did this was in 2017, and it was 10% of Germans who thought it's a good idea. We want that. So 90% were appalled. 2 years later, in 2019, it was already 20%. And we didn't that during Corona time. We've just now done it again. I'm very curious. We'll see the results in a few weeks. What's changing? So people themselves appear to adapt to the new technology in their own. And if we don't have the will for a democracy anymore, then we won't have it soon.
So very briefly, Gerd, I mean, I just want to ask you, we're almost out of time. Would it be fair to characterize your position, your mood, having finished this book, compared to your previous work, which has been exposing human ignorance and folly in different domains, as more pessimistic and more angry than your previous inquiries? I mean, in some ways, you're exposing folly no matter what you do. But how has this inquiry left you? Briefly.
No, I wouldn't characterize myself as angry. I always think that what I do as a director of a Max Planck Institute or as a normal professor, is a risk researcher, is I need to just translate this into the general public. This is why I'm writing these general books. Yeah? I'm writing enough scientific books, but they're not being read as by all this different. I have been equally stunned, not, for instance, what you mentioned about the risk illiteracy of most medical people and the lack of insight of medical department to train them. And what I've done is I've trained myself, thousands of doctors in their continuing medical education, and the Harding Center that I direct have done this for Mozart. So I just put in my time in order to change something. And being angry or disappointed is the worst thing to do. You have to fight for an idea. You may not reach your goals, but you should never give up and continue fighting for it.
Well, we hope you will continue a long time in this endeavor, and we look forward to welcome you back in the future to hear the next chapter of your fight, and we hope you're not a Cassandra in the classical sense. Folks, if you haven't donated or become a member or a patron, please do consider doing that. We love having you with us independently of your economical relation to us, but your contributions do help us to keep going. Also, do consider feeding back in the survey that you'll get, because you can help to shape the future of the RI's talks, both online and in person. Gerd's book is going to be trailed again in the chat, so please do go and buy it either from an international conglomerate that wants your data or from your local bookshop that just wants you to smile and be happy. Please join me as we, as in London at least, the evening darkens, in thanking in Berlin Gerd Gigerenzer very much for his talk. Thank you very much, Gerd.
Welcome.